4. Venus. AD 2144.
Narrated by Theo Solomon.
After George Troon had read the message, he pushed it across to his second-in-command. Arthur Doggett took it, considered it, and then nodded slowly. "So it's out at last. I'd give a lot to see the Rio papers today. Apoplectic'll be an understatement for 'em," he said, with some satisfaction. "Ought to be fun. 200 million Brasileiros all steamed up and demanding immediate action. What do you think'll happen?" Troon shrugged. "As far as we are concerned, no change. Even a million wrathful Brasileiros can't affect celestial mathematics. The powers that be have still got to wait for next conjunction before they can come after us. Meanwhile, I suppose the government will throw a few ministers to the wolves and assure everybody that retribution is well in hand. They're lucky they've only got 6 months of it to weather. What surprises me is that they managed to keep it dark so long," Arthur said. "Anyway," he added, "as far as I'm concerned, the thing that matters is that we beat 'em to it, such as it is, and that's one thing they can't undo." "No." Troon nodded in agreement. "There's nothing they can do about that." The two of them turned as if by common consent to look out of the window. The prospect there was an average Venusian day. The sky was simply a luminous white mist. Visibility was that within a layer of thin cloud, changing range quite rapidly as the mist drove along in a 20-mile-an-hour wind. Most of the time, one could see the sparse, high reeds that began 40 yards away from the dome. They were slightly bent and rippled in the wind like stiff hairs. Now and then the mist cleared enough for some minutes to reveal the tall, astonishingly flexible trees that someone had named feathertops, swinging back and forth in great arcs, 200 yards away. The ground itself, both near and further, was covered with a matting of pale succulent tendrils, the Venusian equivalent of grass. Even at its clearest, it was not a view to inspire. Almost a monochrome study, shadowless, with only here and there a fleshy stalk showing a faint flush of pink, or a slight tinting of green to break the monotony of pallor. And overall, and all the time, there was the mist condensing, drops of water running down the etiolated stems, showers of them torn from the plants by sudden gusts of wind, endless rivulets of them trickling down the window panes. "It's all very well for us," Arthur remarked. "We've been financed to do what we wanted to do, make the first successful landing. Now, as far as I'm concerned, anybody can have it. And welcome." Troon shook his head. "We weren't financed just to make a record, Arthur, nor just to give it away again. Part of our contract is to hold on to it." "Maybe if your cousin Jamie could see what it's like, he'd think again," Arthur suggested. "Not Jamie," said Troon. "He knows what he's doing. Always did. The trouble is that, like his old man, he has such big ideas that you only see bits of them. No. He's satisfied. He's pleased." Arthur Doggett looked out of the window again and shook his head. "If he's pleased with this, there must be a lot more to it than we can see," he said. "I've no doubt. He and his old man are campaigners in a big way, kind of civilian field marshals, and with complete confidence in themselves. The old man was never a bit impressed by the mere size of a job he took on, so he always kept his head. Jamie's the same way." "One of the things I've never understood," Arthur said, "is how a cousin of yours and an Aussie citizen comes to have a Brazzy name like Jamie Gonveya." "Oh, that isn't too difficult. When my grandfather, Geoffrey Trunho, died on the first expedition to Mars, he left 3 children, Anna, George, and Geoffrey, my father, who was born either posthumously or at least after his father reached Mars. My aunt Anna subsequently married one Enrique Policarpo Gonveya, Old Man Gonveya, in fact. She emigrated with him to Australia, and Jamie is their son. Now, Jamie's grandfather, Gonveya, was a friend of my grandfather's, and when my grandfather failed to return from Mars, it was this Grandpa Gonveya who did most of the agitation for a second Martian expedition. In the end, he got together a group who put up half the money for it and shamed the Brazilian government into finding the rest. And his highly speculative share in the success of the expedition there in 2001 was half of the exclusive rights to any botanical finds. To everyone's surprise, some were actually made, along the bottom of the Canali Riffs, and he promptly bought the other fellow out of the half share. For about 20 years, his experts grew, developed, and adapted the seeds and plants. And then, as a result, Grandpa Gouveia and his 2 sons and daughter set out to conquer the world's deserts, which they are still doing. João, the eldest son, took North Africa for his territory. Beatriz went to China, and my uncle Enrique went off, as I said, to Australia. Anna's brother, my Uncle George, stayed in Brazil, and his son, Jorge Trunho, is a commander in the Space Force there. My own father was sent to Australia to school and then to Sao Paulo University. After taking his degree, he returned to Australia, married the daughter of a shipowner there, and was soon sent to manage his father-in-law's office in Durban. At the time of the Second African Rising, when the Africans threw out the Indians, he was accidentally killed in a riot. My mother, left with me, still a small baby, went home to live in Australia, where she changed our name back to its original form of Troon. I see. But it doesn't really explain how your cousin Jamie came to be involved in this business. I'd have thought he'd be much too busy reclaiming deserts. Not while his old man is still in the chair. They're too much of a kind. After he had had a year or so of the desert blossoming business, Jamie could see a lot of will clashing ahead. So he started putting his main interest into other things. Well, I suppose that, what with the Gouveia strain and the Troon strain together, it was more or less a natural that he should get to thinking about space. He hasn't the Troon urge to get out into space. The Gouveia strain is stronger. He only wants to operate it. And the more he looked at space, lying out here with nobody doing anything about it, the more it irked him. After a bit, he got his old man interested too, and then other people, which is why we're here today. Until the Brazies arrived to throw us and his interests out, Arthur put in. Troon shook his head. Don't you believe it? Jamie isn't the kind that gets thrown out, nor's the old man. I'd put the old man down as the richest, as well as the most valuable immigrant Australia ever had, and there must be a goodish part of the Gouveia family fortune sunk in this. No, take it from me. They both know what they're doing. I hope you're right. The Brazie in the street must be tearing mad now he's heard about it. He's pretty proud of that space is a province of Brazil stuff. True enough, even though he'd have more to be proud of if he'd done more about it. All the same, when you look at the difference the Gouveia family has made to the face of the earth with the hundreds of thousands of square miles of deserts they've salvaged, I think they're a good bet. Well, I hope you're right. Things will be a lot less sticky for us if you are, Arthur Doggett replied. Presently, when Arthur had gone off, leaving him alone, Troon looked at the message again and wondered how his cousin was handling things back on Earth. His thoughts returned to a day 3 years ago when a small private aircraft, dead on its appointed time, had hovered over his house and then put down on his landing lawn. Out of it had emerged Jamie Gouveia, a large, active young man in a white suit, white hat, and blue silk shirt, looking rather too big to have fitted into the craft that had brought him. For a moment he had stood beside the machine, looking round George Troon's estate, noting the carefully spaced, thick-limbed Martian-derived trees that were something like spineless cacti and the no less carefully arranged bushes of complementary kinds, examining the mesh of wiry grass beneath his feet and the blades of wider-leafed grass coming up, sparsely as yet, through it. George, as he approached, could see that, somewhat cheerlessly institutional as the calculated precision of the prospect appeared at present, Jamie was approving of it. Not doing badly, he had greeted George. 5 years? Yes, said George. 5 years and 3 months now, from the bare sand. Water good? Adequate. Jamie nodded. In another 3 years you'll be starting real trees. In 20 you'll have a landscape and a climate. Should do nicely. We've just developed a better grass than this. Grows faster. Binds better. I'll tell them to send you some seed." They walked towards the house, across a patio, and into a large, cool room. "I'm sorry Dorothea's away," said George. "She's gone to Rio for a couple of weeks. Dull for her here, I'm afraid." Jamie nodded again. "I know. They're getting patient. The first stages of reclamation aren't exciting. Is she a Braziliphile?" "No, not really," George told him. "But you know how it is. Rio is lights, music, dresses, centre of the world and all that. It recharges her batteries. We usually go a couple of times a year. Occasionally she goes on her own. She's plenty of friends there." "Sorry to miss her," said his cousin. "She'll be sorry not to have seen you. Quite a time since you met," George responded. "Nevertheless," said Jamie, "it does make it a little easier to talk confidential business." George, in the act of approaching the drink cupboard, turned round and looked at his cousin with a lifted eyebrow. "Business?" he remarked. "Since when am I supposed to have known anything about business? And what sort of business?" "Oh, just the usual troon sort. Space," said Jamie. George returned with bottles, glasses and siphon and set them down carefully. "Space," he reminded his cousin. "Space is a province of Brazil." "But it is also a kind of madness in the blood of the troons," Jamie replied. "Now put under restraint for all of us. Except, I suppose, for Jorge Trunjo. Suppose there was an escape route. I should be interested. Say on." Jamie Gonvea leant back in his chair. "I have by now," he said, "grown more than a little tired of this province of Brazil bluff. It is time it was called." "Bluff?" exclaimed George. "Bluff," Jamie repeated. "Brazil has had it easy. She's been sitting on the top of the world so long that she thinks she's there for good, as a provision of nature. She's going soft. In the chaos that followed the Northern War, she worked, and worked hard, to put herself on top. And since then, there have been no challenges to keep her on her toes. She's just sat back over the matter of space, too. When she first proclaimed it a province, she reclaimed the damaged satellites and made 3 of them spaceworthy again, and she took over and improved the old British moon station. But since then, well, look at the record. Nothing at all until Grandpa Trunjo's unlucky Mars expedition in 2094. There wouldn't have been a second expedition there unless Grandpa Gonvea and his pals had pressed for it in 2101. The third, in 2105, was financed entirely by public subscription, and since then, no one has set foot on the place. They abandoned the smallest satellite back in 2080. In 2115, they abandoned another, keeping only Premiera in commission. In 2111, a newspaper and radio campaign on the neglect of space forced them into sending the first Venus expedition. And a shabby affair that was, scandalously ill-equipped. Never heard from it once it had entered the Venus atmosphere, and no wonder. 10 years later, they allowed a learned society to send another ship there, by subscription again. When that too disappeared, they just gave up. In the 20 years since then, nothing further has been done, nothing at all. They've spent just enough to keep Premiera and the moon station habitable, so that they can hog their monopoly of space and, if necessary, threaten the rest of us from there. And that's all. What a record. Far from admirable, agreed George Troon. And so? And so they are going to pay the usual penalty of neglect. Someone else is going to step in. Meaning Jamie Gonvea. With a kind of syndicate I've got together. It's unofficial, of course. The Australian government just can't afford to know anything about it. Support for any idea of the kind would definitely be an unfriendly act towards the Brazilian people. However, we naturally had need of designers, and of the use of yards to build the ships, so that there is, well, a little more than a liaison between us and certain government departments. Nominally, however, it has to be an adventure with a rather old-world title. Privateering. George kept the excitement that was speeding up his pulses carefully imperceptible. Well, well, he said, in a tone that matched his cousin's. Would I be astray in suspecting that there is a part for me in these plans? So perceptive of you, George. Yes, I remember you as a boy on the subject of space, the veritable Troon obsession. As they never outgrow it, I am assuming that you still hear the thin gnat voices calling? I've had to muffle them, Jamie, but they're still there. I thought so, George. So now let me tell you about the job, Jamie had said. A year later, the Aphrodite, with a complement of 10, including George Troon in command, had set out. She was a new kind of ship, for she had a new kind of task. Venus in one leap, with no help from satellite or moon station. As such, she was devoid of all unnecessary weight, victualled and found only for one voyage and a few weeks more. Everything beyond bare necessities was to follow her in supply rockets. A supply rocket, or shuttle or crate, could be built for a fraction of the cost of a manned rocket. With living quarters, insulation, air supply, water purifying system, and all the rest of the human needs eliminated, the payload could be over 50% higher. Launching, too, was more economical. A shuttle could be given a ground boost and a quick step boost, producing an acceleration several times greater than a human cargo could survive. Once launched and locked onto its target, it would continue to travel by inertia until it should pick up the coded radio signals that would check and take charge of it. There was no more difficulty in directing a supply rocket to Venus than in aiming it for a satellite or for the moon, and no more power was needed to get it there, though it would require extra fuel for a safe landing against the planetary pull. The question of supplies, therefore, raised few difficulties. The problems arose over the key ship, the manned Aphrodite, for she must take off under full load, sustain her crew for the voyage, and above all, be maneuverable enough in atmosphere to choose her landing when she should arrive. It was the last proviso that called for modified design. Both the previous expeditions were known to have entered the Venus atmosphere. It was after that something fatal had befallen them, and the general opinion among spacemen was that neither had proved sufficiently maneuverable to pick, and, if necessary, to change its choice of, landing place with accuracy. On a vapor-bound planet, where inspection could not be visual until the last moments, that was essential. Many years ago, it had been supposed that Venus was entirely, or almost entirely, water-covered. That had later given way to the theory that the perpetual clouds were not vaporous, but were formed of dust swept up from an arid surface by constant fierce winds. Several times since then, opinions had swung this way and that between the two extremes, until there was general acceptance of the view that the planet was probably waterlogged, but scarcely likely to lack land masses entirely. Radar, however, would not be able to distinguish accurately between marshland and solid ground, or even, with certainty, between either and floating weed beds, should such exist. Infrared would tell more, but from a comparatively low altitude. It might well be that the true nature of the ground would be indiscernible above a few hundred feet, and it was imperative, therefore, that a ship which discovered itself to be descending upon a mudbank or a morass should have the ability to draw off and search for better ground. It was a problem that had not occurred with Earth landings, where a ship was brought in by an alliance of radio and electronic control, nor had it arisen on Mars, with its dry surface and normally perfect visibility. In the event, the last stage of the Aphrodite's journey had proved the worth of the designer's trouble. Had she not been able to cruise at moderate altitude in search of a landing place, there would have been an end of her. The cruise gave her the opportunity to discover that the proportion of land to sea over the area she covered was extremely small, and none of it was the high, firm ground she sought. At last, Troon decided to return to the largest island so far observed, a low-lying mass about 150 miles long and 100 miles across at its widest, misted over and sodden under continuous rain. Even then, it had been difficult to find a suitable landing area. Hard to tell whether the monotonous grey-white vegetation they saw below was low-growing bushes or densely packed treetops. Impossible to know what sort of ground lay beneath it. One could do no more than make a guess from the apparent configuration of the ground. Troon had made 6 unsuccessful attempts to land the ship. On 2 of them, she got as far as touching the mud and started to sink into it before blasting free again. At the 7th try, however, the tripod supports had squelched through only 2 or 3 inches of mud before they found a firm bottom. Then, at last, Troon had been able to switch off and stagger over to his bunk, past caring or wanting to know anything more about the planet he had reached. The Aphrodite's landing took place 2 weeks ahead of conjunction. A week later, they had picked up the signal of the first supply rocket, switched on contact, and put it into a spiral. They lost it for an hour or 2 when it was on the other side of the planet on its first circuit, but picked it up again as it came round, and held it thereafter. It was brought in and landed successfully in a roughly surveyed area a mile or so to the south of the ship. Of the 7 that followed it in the course of the next 2 weeks, only number 5 gave trouble. In the final stages of descent, she developed a fault which cut out the main drive and dropped her like a stone for 200 feet. She split open as she hit, but luckily it had been possible to salvage most of her contents. The unloading priority had been the dome from number 2 rocket. It was badly needed to get them out of the cramped cabin of the Aphrodite and gave them shelter from the eternal rain and drizzle into a place where there would be room to live and work and protect the stores. Even before it was fully ready, however, there had come a message from Jamie, saying laconically, "They're on to you, George. You have 584 days, or a little less, to get ready for them." They, it quickly became clear, meant only certain official circles in Brazil, and their knowledge was severely restricted. A public admission that an expedition had not only made an unauthorized incursion into the Brazilian province of space, but had stolen a march on its nominal administrators by achieving the first successful landing on Venus, would involve not only the Space Department, but the whole government in a serious loss of face. The evident intention was to avoid publicity, while countermeasures were prepared, possibly in the hope that if the secret could be kept until a Brazilian expedition had been dispatched at the next conjunction, there might be no need of the admission at all. Absence of publicity suited both parties for the present. So long as it lasted, no awkward representations could be made to the Australian government, and no overt, or even covert, reprisals taken. Meanwhile, both of them employed the interlude which the laws of planetary motion imposed. On Venus, once the essentials of the dome were erected, the entire party busied itself with collecting, photographing, preserving, and crating specimens of Venusian air, water, soil, rock, plants, seeds, and insect-type life, working against time to get at least these preliminary, and as yet unclassified, specimens loaded aboard the emptied number 2 supply rocket and dispatched as soon as possible towards the now receding Earth. Only when that had been accomplished did they relax and, turning their attention to the other shuttles, set about making the dome into as comfortable a habitation as possible. Back in Rio, the higher levels of the Space Force pulled schemes for Venusian expeditions out of their pigeonholes, called in technicians, and started to get down to the task of creating a commando which must be ready not only to reach Venus by the time of the next conjunction, but to take police action when it should arrive. When the matter of assigning personnel arose, it was almost inevitable that Space Commander Jorge Manuel Trunho should be among those chosen. His qualifications and record were first class, and his family's history and tradition would have made failure to include him invidious. In Sydney, Jamie Gonvaya, through his own peculiar channels, received the news of the appointment with satisfaction. There was a place in his plans for Commander J.M. Trunho. The satellite, Premiera, now alerted, detected number 2 supply rocket in the course of its return journey to Earth and inquired whether it should intercept with a guided missile. A hurried council called in Rio was divided in its opinions. The members could not know that the object detected was simply a freighter. It might be the expedition returning. It was true that messages originating upon Venus were still being picked up, in an as yet unbroken code, but they might be dummy messages, originating from an automatic transmitter left there as a bluff. If the returning rocket were to be summarily blown to bits, and then turned out to have contained the expedition, or even a part of it, somebody would certainly give the matter publicity. and the public reaction would be bad. The government would be reviled for an act scarcely to be distinguished from murder, and the victims would very likely become heroes overnight. In the end, therefore, Primiera was instructed to make no attack, but to continue observation, and home stations were ordered to be ready to track the object as it approached the Earth. This they did, but had the misfortune to lose it somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, and no more was heard of it. Thereafter, for more than a year, all parties had worked secretly, and without alarms. Now that the cat was, at least, publicly out of the bag, it caused political ructions in Rio, but made little practical difference. Not even to appease the wrath of the Brazilian people could the conjunction of planets be hastened. Time had been short enough anyway, and whatever ministers might say in speeches, preparations could only go ahead as planned. In Sydney, Jamie Gonvaya boarded a Brazil-bound aircraft in order to study reactions at their centre. It was a stage that called for careful observation and assessment, with perhaps a little influence thrown in at critical moments. His only surprise was that the breakdown of security had not come sooner. A leakage he had expected, but he had not foreseen the source of it, and hoped that by the time George Troon returned, the details would have been forgotten. For Dorothea, Mrs. George Troon, after a year of a preoccupied husband, followed by more than a year of grass widowhood tediously spent in the slowly regenerating wilderness that was her home, was in the habit of making periodical visits to Rio to break up the depression induced by these things. Taken by friends one night to a party which she found unamusing, she had attempted to improve it by several glasses of iced aguardente and passion fruit, dashed with quinine and bitters. Her intention of raising her spirits had somehow gone wrong, and she had lifted, instead, the sluices of self-pity. She became woefully the neglected wife, and though in the course of lamenting this, she did not actually mention her husband's whereabouts, it became clear that she had not seen him for some little time, clear enough to catch the attention of one Agostino Tarope, a fellow guest who happened also to be a columnist on the Diario do São Paulo. It occurred to Agostino that a prolonged absence of a member of the Troon family could have interesting implications, and if his subsequent inquiries did not produce many hard facts, he collected enough indications to convince himself that it was worth taking a risk with some pointed comment. Other papers pounced upon and inflated his speculations. Nobody was able to produce George Troon to refute the rumours, and the row was on. The Brazzie in the street was, as Arthur Doggett had suggested, tearing mad. He turned out in large numbers, carrying banners which proclaimed space to be a province of Brazil and demanded action against Australian aggression. Replying to an official approach, the Australian government denied any knowledge of the matter, but undertook to look into the rumours, while pointing out that Australia was a free country of free citizens. Political and official circles in Brazil were far from unanimous. Factions started to form. Some held the forthright chauvinist view of holding on to space at any cost. Others saw it as a regrettable expense, but a strategic necessity. One group considered it a waste of money to maintain stations and a force which could bring no return. Strong complaints about the lack of enterprise in the development of space began to be heard again. The Space Force itself was split several ways. Those at the top, and previously in the know, were already resentful at being shaken out of a comfortable routine, and reacted with bluster to the newspaper comments on the inefficiency of the service. The younger stratum of officers and men began to look forward to action and excitement in the defence of space. Among the men with longer service, however, there was a variety of opinion. Many of those who had joined for the great adventure of exploring space, only to find themselves stagnating for years in sentry duty, showed a cynicism little short of subversive. Plenty of disillusioned voices could be heard saying, "Why stop 'em? All we've done out there for 100 years is play dog in the manger, and it'll be no better if we do chuck 'em out. If there are others ready to have a shot at really doing a job out there, then let 'em, I say. And good luck to 'em." It was to this stratum of opinion that Jamie Gonvea was giving his most careful attention at the moment. Meanwhile, the party on Venus had found its forbearance severely tested. Once the dome had been made more comfortable, the 3 jet platforms assembled, and the island mapped by infrared photography, exploration, in its wider sense, had virtually come to an end. The land was found to be monotonously low-lying, with a backbone of raised ground, which at its highest points barely exceeded 100 feet. Much of the coast was hard to determine, for it shelved gradually into a tideless sea in great stretches of swamps and marsh, and the weeds growing out of the muddy water had little to distinguish them from those that covered the saturated land. Animate life on the island was restricted to insects, a few wandering crustaceans not unsimilar to spider crabs which seldom came far from the shore, and a few lunged fish, apparently in the process of becoming amphibians. In the sea, there was plenty of life, large and small, but the coastal marshes cut off all surface approach, and the disturbance caused by the jets made it all but impossible to net specimens from hovering platforms. Cautious descents were made in various parts of the island to take samples. Landing on the lower ground was usually out of the question, and even on the higher slopes, it was risky. The platform had to hang cautiously just above the growths, while one member of its crew probed with a long rod. With luck, there might be rock a few inches below the surface, and it could put down. Far more often, there was a bed of dangerous mud, where the probe would go feet deep into a mush made by generations of rotting plants, discovering no bottom at all. So there, too, most of the specimen taking had to be conducted with scoops wielded from the platforms. "A fiery hell," Doggett had proclaimed. "Seems a nice clean conception when you compare it with the stinking, rotting slime under the goddamn never-ending rain in this place." Any exploration beyond the bounds of the island was out of the question, for observation had already shown how rare land was, and the platforms were not equal to long-range travel. There was, therefore, no disposition whatever to risk taking them out over the uncharted seas. The biologists of the party had far the best of it. Poring over sections through microscopes gave them endless interest. Once the shuttles had been unloaded, there was little temptation to go outside the dome for anything other than a specimen collecting expedition. Inside, kept dry and comfortable by a desiccating plant, there was increasingly boredom for all but the 4 biologists. They remained happily busy, and, by degrees, the rest drifted into lending them a hand, and into becoming biologists, or at least biologists' assistants themselves. Troon observed the development with approval. "Good," he said. "It saves me getting round to the cliché of, 'They also serve.' I'd hate that, because it's not really the statement it appears to be. More often it is an indication that the speaker is getting troubled about morale. So anything for some interest, even if it is only water bugs. Conjunction is a bit too infrequent. 584 days is a long time to be stuck on a mud bank." "I doubt if the Brassies could mount an expedition in less, anyway," Doggett said. "Or whether, if they knew what this place is like, they'd bother to send one at all." "Oh, they would. Matter of principle. As long as we are here, space is not entirely a province of Brazil. Besides, it may not turn out to be quite as useless as it seems to us at present." Arthur Doggett said, dubiously. "Anyway, it was a bit of intolerable bombast ever to claim it. Space should be there for anyone who is willing to explore and exploit it." Troon grinned. "Spoken like a true Briton. Just what the English said about the undiscovered world, when there was the same sort of bombastic assumption over that. In the days of real papal dictatorship, Alexander VI reckoned the whole place was his to allocate. So, in an open-handed way, he gave the Portuguese the east and the Spaniards the west. And what happened? The very next year, that arrangement came unstuck, and the Portuguese enterprisingly claimed the whole of South America, and 6 years later, Cabral took possession of Brazil for them." "Did he, now? And what did the Pope have to say to that?" "He wasn't in a position to say anything. That particular spiritual servant happened to be a Borgia, and died of a bowl of poisoned wine he had prepared for a friend. But the point is this. claiming things is rather in the Portuguese blood. Vasco da Gama claimed India for them, but they held only Goa, and of South America they held only Brazil, until they lost it. Now their descendants claim all space, but hold only a satellite station and the moon. Their earlier grandiose claims did not keep the British and the Dutch and the rest out of undeveloped territories, and there's no good reason why the present ones should. Said Arthur again. Times have changed, though. We've got here. But I don't see how, even if the place were worth hanging on to, we could keep up any regular communications between Earth and this gob of mud. Not with guided missiles out hunting for us each trip. I'd like to know the real plan. Sometimes I get a nasty feeling that we could be just bait. In a way, of course we are, Troon admitted. The existing situation had to be cracked open some way. I think this is a pretty good one. As the matter stands now, a lot of people in Brazil will be calling us pirates and other ruder things, though not all of them, by any means. But what about the rest of the world? They'll be taking a very different view of it. I don't mind betting we are popular heroes now, in most places, and on 2 counts. One, that we have made a successful landing here at last, and the other, that we've wiped the Brazzy eye. Everybody will be delighted over that, which will be the chief reason that the Brazzies are wild. What is more, it puts them in a spot. They have foreign relations to preserve, so they can't just drop a bomb on us, for they would then appear as the big crude bully. They'd earn worldwide hostile contempt, and very likely plenty at home too. In fact, if they actually turn any kind of weapons on us at all, they'll be in for a lot of opprobrium. So it looks as if the only way they can handle it, without losing even more prestige than they have already, is to capture us and run us as ignominiously as possible out of what they claim to be their territory, being careful, on account of public relations, to do us as little physical damage as possible. Very well then. They will arrive with the intention of netting us. But we're here first. We can make preparations for that. We have at least as good a chance of netting them if we can work it right. And that's what we've got to do. And when we have? Arthur asked. I'm not sure, but at least we shall have hostages. Your cousin Jamie might have a plan for the next stage. I don't doubt it. But that is as far as he is telling us at present. I just hope your degree of confidence in him is justified. My dear Arthur, a great deal of money has been sunk in this affair, including a large part of the Gonvea family fortune. It is evident that cleverer men, with more to lose than you and I, are satisfied that Jamie knows what he's doing. I hope you're right. I'd just like to be able to see more of the picture, that's all. We shall. I'm willing to bet that the overall strategy is being taken good care of, from the little I know of it. But the local tactics are our affair, of course, and it seems to me the best thing we can do is to work out several plans to suit different circumstances. When we know more about how they're going to tackle it and what their equipment is, we can fill in the details of the most suitable plans. At present, our information on their plans is still pretty slim, but we shall get more. In the meantime, my idea of preparing a reception for them is this. The Brazilians, being under no obligation to make their Venus-bound lift direct from Earth, had no intention of trying it. The satellite, Primera, offered them a means of starting and building up speed without the drag of gravity, and, naturally, they made use of that. Gone, therefore, even a few weeks after the first intelligence of the Troon expedition's presence on Venus, were Primera's leisurely days when the only interruptions of her comfortable lethargy were the supply shuttles and the monthly relief rockets. Orders started to pour in. Sections of the satellite that had been closed off and put out of commission years ago were opened up, examined, tested, repaired where necessary, and made habitable again. Quantities of supplies came up in shuttles, and, presently, technicians followed them. Soon, long cylinders of a new ballistic type, containers of air, water, stores, fuel, and the rest were arriving, to be captured and tethered electronically about the station. Later on came sections of larger shuttles. Engineers in spacesuits emerged from Premiera and jetted themselves across the void to start assembling them. In a few months, the whole neighborhood of the satellite was littered with floating masses of metal and containers of all shapes and sizes, gradually being drawn together and bolted, welded, and sealed into comprehensible shapes. The work went on continuously in shifts, with artificial lights blazing during the brief nights in the Earth's shadow, until gradually the chaos was tidied into the form of 5 large new shuttles. Activity then became less spectacular, while the engineers worked inside them, fitting the new hulks with their electronic circuits, linking the remote controls to the main drive, and stabilizing and correcting jets, testing, adjusting, and readjusting the gear's responses to radio signals, which would be their only pilots. While that was still going on, the ballistic cylinders were opened, and again the area was littered with spacesuited men gently propelling cases of all shapes and sizes towards one or another of the shuttles for stowage. The ballistic cylinders themselves were expendable. It would have cost more to get one safely back to Earth and recondition it than to make a new one, so that when they were emptied, a charge was clamped onto them, and they were dispatched to crash harmlessly among the lunar crags, where they could no longer be a hazard to navigation. The work went well, and in spite of setbacks, it was completed a full month ahead of schedule. The area was then clear. The 5 fully loaded shuttles, linked by cables, hung in a bunch, revolving about the satellite at a range of 20 miles and linked to it by radio beam. The satellite itself, the intricate machine that had grown up from the first of all the space stations, kept smoothly on its orbit, with 2 small rocket ships in attendance, waiting. "They're using shuttles, as I told you," Jamie Gonvea informed Troon. "They have, however, improved on our method, presumably because, had they to await the arrival of their shuttles as you did of yours, they would be in a weak position and unable to take any action against you until the shuttles should arrive. The idea they have adopted, therefore, is one of unified control, whereby they and their shuttles will travel together and arrive simultaneously. The whole group is intended to handle as one ship. This means that you must be prepared to take very swift action before they have a chance to deploy." The key ship, the Santa Maria, came up 2 weeks before the calculated starting date, and hove to, hanging in space a mere mile or so from Premiera. She had left Earth with only 5 men aboard. The rest of her full complement of 20 were awaiting her on the satellite. With her arrival, activity broke out again. Figures emerged from Premiera's locks, some of them jetting across the gap immediately, others maneuvering containers out of the dock doors and guiding them into a drift towards the ship. Once more, there began a process of testing and checking, which, with the provisioning and final fitting out, continued in shifts for a week. Inspected and passed at last, the Santa Maria moved off a few miles. The cluster of the 5 waiting shuttles were brought closer and broken up. Each of them was urged and juggled into approximately its proper relation to the rest. When the last was placed, the small tug shells and thrusters drew off and made back to Premiera, leaving on each shuttle a party of only 4 spacesuited men, linked together by lines and equipped with portable jet tubes to steady their charges and correct drift. In the center, roughly equidistant from all 5 shuttles, the Santa Maria waited. Aboard her, Capitão João Camarello and his first officer, Commander Jorge Trunjo, watched the tugs draw clear of the area. "Ready, shuttles?" the Capitão asked. A man on each shuttle acknowledged. "Good," approved the Capitão. "Keep ready. We shall make contact with you in exactly 10 minutes from now." The spacesuited men clinging to the shuttles continued to check twist and drift in their charges as well as they could. 2 minutes to alignment," said the Capitão. "Get clear of all tubes now, and check your short safety lines. No trouble? Fine. 1 minute to go now. 30 seconds. 10 seconds. Now!" The chief electronics officer, pressed his first key. Little jets of flame broke from the steering tubes of the shuttles. Each turned over, rolled and twisted, swinging round to align itself with the parent ship, firing more small jets to correct and steady the overswing. Presently, all were lying in exactly the same orientation, with their main driving tubes pointed towards the gleaming crescent of the Earth. "Phase 1 completed. All well?" inquired the Capitão. One after another, the men tethered to the shuttles reported. He went on. "Positioning will take place in 2 minutes from now." The electronics officer regarded the hand of the clock, pressed his second key, and turned his attention to a small screen in front of him. Outside, more little twinkling bursts came from the shuttles. On the screen, small illuminated figures started to drift very slowly. Presently, the white figure 4 turned green and ceased to drift. "Number 4 fixed, sir," he reported. The Capitão glanced at the screen. "Good. Use that as the axis." Gradually, the other figures changed the direction of their drift. One after another, they too turned green. As the last one altered, the officer reported, "Formation complete and locked, sir." The Capitão lifted the microphone. "Good work, boys. And thank you. Commander, you can take your men home now. We shall test control." The men in spacesuits unhooked, kicked off into the void, then leveled their hand tubes and set themselves scudding through emptiness towards the satellite. When they reached it, they were able to look back and see the pattern of their operation complete. The Santa Maria lay relatively motionless. About her, each at a distance of more than 2 miles, hung the shuttles, at the angles of a huge pentagon. Invisible proximity beams linked them all, each to the Santa Maria in the middle and to both of its neighbours. Occasionally, one or another would show a brief twinkle of flame as the automatic gear cut in to correct the least loss of position. 6 Earth days later, the personnel on Premiera collected round the stationary screen in their spinning home to watch the start. The farewells and good wishes were over, and they watched in silence. A voice aboard the Santa Maria came through the loudspeaker, counting the seconds. Then Capitão Camarello's order. "Fire!" From the main tubes of the Santa Maria, and from those of all the 5 shuttles, belched jets of flame, quickly growing fiercer. The whole formation began to move as one. The blast of the driving tubes grew whiter and fiercer still. In a few minutes, the expedition was gone, and, to mark it, a new constellation hung in a bright pentagon against the jet-black sky. "Of course, we keep up radio communication," Troon explained patiently. "And of course, they'll locate us by it. This is a showdown. It's no damn good they're landing in some other part of this pestiferous planet where neither of us can get at the other, is it? The nearer to us they land, the better, because the sooner we can reach them. But God knows what sort of a mess their landing's going to be. We had quite enough trouble in getting just one ship down safely." "As I understand it," said Arthur, "the whole unit works on a kind of servo system, by which, whatever the manned key ship does, the rest do the same. That must be so, I think. The elaborations and complications of 5 men in one ship, controlling 5 shuttles independently while that ship is descending, are beyond contemplation. Therefore, the intention must be to land in the same formation they travel in, a pentagon, though I suppose they may be able to contract or expand its size a bit. That being so, all their attention will have to be concentrated on the safe landing of the key ship, and the shuttles must more or less take their chance. Those chaps certainly can't know what they're in for. You might bring off a trick like that fairly neatly on a dead flat prairie, but not on a mud pie. My betting is that it will be only luck if one of their shuttles stays upright, and most likely that all of them will sink in the swamps." "We can't be bothered about that," Troon told him. "What we have to concentrate on is being as close as we can to the key ship when she comes down, and without having any of the shuttles coming down on top of us." It would help if we knew what distances they intend to keep. We'd better get onto Jamie again and see if he has any information on the landing drill. Excellent as Jamie's information service was, it could not help there. Any decision to expand or contract the Pentagon formation must obviously, he pointed out, be left to the captain's discretion. His sources continued, however, to give reliable information on the expedition's progress, and as its ETA drew near, the radar was set searching for it beyond the Venus cloud cover. The formation was first faintly detected at a great height, still moving fast, and presumably closing on a spiral. Troon promptly dispatched a message announcing its approach. On its second circuit, still at a considerable distance, but travelling more slowly, it had altered direction, from which he judged that the point of origin of his message had been plotted. "Make ready," he ordered. "They ought to be down next time." The party checked that its weapons and supplies in waterproof covers were aboard the 3 jet platforms. Then they climbed into their spacesuits, as the best form of protection against the never-ending rain outside, and waited, with their helmets handy. At last, the formation showed up on the screen, seen now from a different angle, travelling slowly in from the north at a mere 25,000 feet. All 6 ships had tilted almost to the vertical, but the Pentagon formation was still perfect, and now in the same plane with the surface of the ground. As they came closer, standing on their main drives, they showed simply as a pattern of circular spots, which drifted almost to the centre of the screen. The party in the dome put on its helmets and made for platforms, leaving a single man at the radar. He hooked up a microphone, and his voice reached them all. "Key ship east-northeast, estimate 5 miles. Separation from servo ships, estimate 1 mile. Appears constant." The platforms rose a little and skimmed out of the locks, climbing on a gentle slant. "Don't bother about the shuttles unless the separation alters. Concentrate on the key ship," Troon told the operator. "Right, George. Rate of descent slow and cautious. I'd say around 1,200 a minute. Now a little under 18,000. Steady and vertical." The platforms sped on, travelling a few feet above the tops of the trees which rose out of the tangle of pallid, slimy growths that hid the ground. Presently, Troon brought his to a halt and sent the other 2 out on the flanks. Hanging there, with the fronds of the feather-topped trees swinging across just beneath him, he switched on the outside microphone and heard for the first time the roar of the rockets overhead. The thunder of 6 rocket ships descending at once was almost unnerving. He switched off again, and the 3 of them stood peering anxiously into the clouds above. A few minutes seemed a long time. 8,000, said the radar man, and a little later, 5,000. One could hear the noise now through the helmet and feel the buffeting of the sound waves. A man on one of the other platforms exclaimed suddenly, "There's one of them!" Almost at the same moment, Troon's neighbour caught his arm and pointed up. Troon looked and saw a brilliant, diffused reddish light with the quality of sunset breaking through above them. He sent the platform swooping forward, out of harm's way. The buffeting grew until the platform was trembling with it. He could see 4 glows in the clouds now. The one behind, one ahead, 2 dimmer ones on either side, but all of them growing brighter. The platform began to sway, as if the roaring billows of sound were tossing it. "Under 1,000, said the radar man's voice. "They're lucky, dead lucky. Quite a bit of firm ground round here," came Arthur's voice. Troon did his best to look all ways at once. The flare behind was still the closest. He edged a little further away from it, and then kept his eyes on the one ahead. That, he calculated, must be that of the key ship. All 3 men clung fast to their holds as the platform rocked. It became barely possible to look at the brilliance. Hanging on with one hand, he raised the other in front of his helmet and peered through slits between his gloved fingers. At 200 feet, the flames were stabbing into the ground, and the steam was rising in thickening clouds to blot everything A moment later, there was nothing to be seen but a dazzling white nimbus, with its centre slowly growing more intense. Troon looked quickly round again. All about them was whitely shining steam. Then, suddenly, the noise stopped. The platform ceased to tremble. The vivid white spots in the steam died. In the abrupt silence of his helmet, Troon asked, "Arthur, have you marked the keyship?" "I reckon so, George." "You, Ted?" "Pretty sure of it, George. I'll make certain when this steam lets up. She'll have ports. The others won't." "Well, both of you stay where you are until you can be sure. Then find her airlock side and close into 50 yards. He edged his own platform forward. The air was clearing, but it was not possible to see the ship yet. She was still hidden somewhere in the cloud of steam, vaporizing from the sodden ground. But it seemed fairly certain that her landing, at any rate, had been successful, whatever might have happened to the shuttles. Visibility gradually improved. Before long, he could see the outline of her top. Soon he could make out the upper part clearly enough to see the ports and be sure that she was the Santa Maria and no unmanned shuttle. She was leaning a little, but not dangerously at present. He drove the platform forward towards the steam that still shrouded her base. Gradually, that thinned too. He was able to see that she had indeed been lucky in her landing place, and the tripod foot on the tilt side showed no sign of sinking further. He took the platform down to a few feet above the ground, and a little closer. The ends of the ship's main driving tubes were still glowing, and the rain was vanishing into little steam puffs before it could actually touch them. The area directly beneath her was seared clear of vegetation, and muddy water was seeping back into it, steaming gently. Troon brought his platform down to within inches of the ground and steered it in between two of the tripod legs. "Let it go," he said. His two companions unclipped the straps of a rectangular bale sealed into a waterproof cover and tumbled it over the side to fall in the mud with a squelch. Skillfully, Troon checked the upward bounce of the platform as it lost the weight. Then he backed off and sped away. "Arthur? Ted? Have you located the airlock yet?" "Arthur here. Yes, George. It's facing due south." "Good. Keep it covered. I'll be round there with you." He handed control of the platform over to one of his companions and turned a knob on his helmet, putting his headset onto one of the Brazilian Space Force's intercom wavelengths. In Portuguese, he called, "Troon calling, Troon calling, Troon calling Capital Camarello." There was a short pause, during which his platform approached Arthur's and drew up beside it. Then a voice replied, "This is the Santa Maria, spaceship of the Estados Unidos do Brasil, Capital João Camarello." "Buenos dias, Capital," said Troon, "and my felicitations, Senor, upon your excellent landing." "Muito obrigado, Senor Troon. And my congratulations to you upon your survival of the rigors of this singularly unattractive-looking planet. It is, however, my regrettable duty to inform you that, by order of the Congress of the United States of Brazil, you and your companions are under arrest, charged with violating the sovereignty of Brazilian territory. One hopes that you will recognize the situation and accept it." "Your message is not unexpected, Senor," Troon told him. "But in return, I must inform you that since the Brazilian claim to this territory rests neither on its discovery by Brazil nor upon Brazil's prime establishment here, it cannot be considered to have any validity. I am therefore entitled, under the grounds of your unauthorized landing, to require that you and your crew should put yourselves under my orders. Until I have your assurance that this will be done, I cannot grant you permission to leave your ship." "Mr. Troon, you have been informed, I do not doubt, of the strength of our expedition. So may I remind you that there are 2 of us to 1 of you. If, indeed, your party has survived intact the tribulations of such a detestable climate as this appears to be." "That is quite true, Capital Camarello. But we are not caught in a metal trap. Furthermore, I ought, I think, to tell you that we have your airlock covered." And I must also warn you against an attempt to take off again, should it occur to you to look for a more hospitable landing area. There is, beneath you at this moment, a considerable bale of TNT. You cannot fire your drive without igniting it before you lift, whereupon it may do your ship considerable damage and will certainly overturn her, thus making takeoff impossible for you. Your situation, therefore, is awkward, Capital. After a pause, the voice replied, "Ingenious, Mr. Troon. I will take your word for it. But at least we do not have to sit out in the rain in order to maintain our side of the impasse." "But neither do we, senor. Unless I receive your capitulation very shortly, we shall simply fix a wire cable round your ship in such a position as to prevent the outer door of your airlock from opening. We shall then be able to wait indefinitely, and in somewhat more comfort than yourselves, for your decision." Troon caught sight of Arthur Doggett, signalling him from the next platform. He switched over to their usual wavelength. Arthur said, "If he does agree, and I can't see that he's got any choice, what do we do with them, George? Keep them handcuffed all the time? After all, they're 2-1, as he said. Why should he keep any agreement to surrender?" "All right," Troon told him. "Just you wait a bit and see. We'll set down now to save power, but keep an eye on the door. Give it a bullet if it so much as moves." The 3 platforms descended carefully, seeking spots where the matting of growth was thick enough to keep them out of the mud, and waited. Troon switched back to the other wavelength, but a full hour passed before any sound could be heard on it. And then it was another voice that spoke. "Hello?" it said. "George Troon." Troon acknowledged. "Jorge Trunho here," said the voice. "I was hoping to hear from you, Cousin Jorge," said Troon. "What's the reply?" "A change of authority," Jorge Trunho told him. "I have now taken command of this ship. With the exception of Capital Camarello and 4 other men whom we have put under arrest, we are now willing to carry out your orders." "I am glad you appreciate that there was no sense in prolonging the situation," said Troon, and issued his instructions. As he switched over, Arthur Doggett said, "What goes on, George? I don't like this at all. It's a whole lot too easy." "You don't need to worry," Troon told him. "The Brazilian Space Force is riddled with young men who've been frustrated for years and know they're likely to stay that way as long as Brazil has the monopoly of space. They're overripe for a change. All that was needed was the opportunity and someone to organize." Arthur considered. "You mean this was all fixed? You've put him in a spot to give Trunho the chance to take over. You knew he would." "That was the plan, Arthur. The awkward spot made it easier for him to sway the undecided ones." "I see. All nicely arranged in advance. And by Cousin Jamie, I suppose?" Troon nodded. "Under his auspices, at any rate. I told you, Cousin Jamie knows what he's doing." The slow twist on the Santa Maria was about to bring the sun into view, but before it could come searing through the port, Arthur Doggett pushed the cover across and fixed it. He looked round the bare, tank-like compartment in which they were confined. Then he pushed himself across to his acceleration couch, fastened the straps to give some illusion of weight, and lay there, frowning. At length, he said, "What makes me kick myself, what really burns me up, is that I knew at the time it was all too damned easy. I even said so. God, what a mug." Troon shook his head. It should have been easy. It was intended to be. That part of it would have gone just the way it did, even if Jorge hadn't been double-crossing. The whole thing went quite according to plan, until he pulled that fast one when we got back to the dome. It's no good blaming ourselves for trusting Jorge. We had to. 10 of us couldn't have kept 20 of them under restraint indefinitely. It was a calculated risk. Jamie was gambling on Cousin Jorge's Troon blood. That his spaceward urge would be greater than his loyalty to the Brazilian Space Force. Well, that was a bad bet. Or was it? I'm still not quite sure. It may not have been loyalty. It could easily be that he was reckoning the chances differently. He could be calculating that after this shake-up, the Brazzies will really get down to doing something in space, and that he's likely to be in the forefront of whatever they do. And getting a medal for turning us in for piracy won't do him any official harm either, added one of the others, bitterly. No, Troon agreed. But if the thought of the charge is worrying you, I shouldn't let it. They'll have to put us on trial, of course, but luckily there's been no bloodshed, so the odds are they'll pardon us, or just give us a token penalty. After all, we did get there, and we were the first to make it. Now that we are no longer a danger, the sentiment will swing around. They'd lose a devil of a lot of public favour if they tried to keep us in jail for it. Well, that's something, and I reckon you're right, Arthur admitted. Most of the worrying is going to come the way of that organising genius, your cousin Jamie, and whoever else put up the money. I never did think they'd get much for all they spent to exploit that lousy planet anyway. But whatever there is there, the Brazzies are going to get it now. Just a bit too clever for one another, your relatives. Maybe, admitted Troon. But I'd not be sure yet. After all, we did ship Jamie one shuttle load of specimens, remember? His people working on them will have about 2 years' start of any Brazzie researchers. And that's quite a lot, with Old Man Gonvea's botanical organisation behind it. All right. Your cousin Jamie may be a marvel, commercially, Arthur conceded. But your cousin Jorge has certainly taken him and all of us for a ride, strategically. And thanks to him, damn it, the Brazzies have now got the lot. Our ship, our dome and supplies, all our research work, and us. As profitable a bit of double-crossing as ever there was, with laurels and promotion for Jorge Trunho. Look here, put in one of the others. The Troon family, as everyone knows, has a deserved reputation for gambling with space in a big way. Some of the gambles have come off, and some of them haven't. The first half of this one did, and the second half hasn't. Now, I suggest that we agree to drop the subject. We've a long journey ahead, and choring the subject over and over isn't going to sweeten it, or get us anywhere. Agreed? The journey was tedious indeed. Nothing broke it but the regular arrival of meals. Covered cans floated into the compartment by one member of the Brazilian Space Force, while another guarded the door. The captives received no bearings, no progress reports. They simply waited timelessly for it to end. At last, it did. For the first time during the trip, a concealed speaker broke silence with a click and a scratch. Secure all loose objects, it instructed twice, in Portuguese. The crew of the Aphrodite stared at one another, scarcely able to believe that the imprisonment was coming to an end at last. Half an hour later, the voice spoke again. All loose objects should have been made fast by now. Everyone to couches, and make ready. All to couches. Fasten all straps. Deceleration will begin in 10 minutes from now. Troon opened a port cover. The slow turn gave him a view of a huge Earth crescent sliding smoothly up the black sky. He secured the cover again and got onto his couch. Not an Earth landing, he said. Must be putting in at the Premiera. 4 minutes, announced the loudspeaker. Premiera, thought Troon. The old threshold of space. I wonder what its builders would have to say if they could see the first successful Venus expedition coming in as prisoners. The speaker was counting now. He composed himself to wait for the thrust and the onset of weight. One after another, Troon's crew jetted themselves across from the Santa Maria to Premiera. Once through the airlock there, they took off their spacesuits and waited, with a guard in charge of them. During the considerable delay, they sat watching other men entering the airlock to go outside. There seemed to be a great many of them. More than an hour passed before the Capital Camarello and his second-in-command, Jorge Trunho, arrived and removed their spacesuits to reveal themselves dressed in immaculate uniforms for the occasion. It was evident that the handing over of their prisoners to the commander of the satellite was to be a formal affair. Troon was not much impressed. He smiled and tried to catch his cousin's eye. Jorge caught it stonily once, and thereafter avoided it. 2 more armed guards appeared. The party was marched to the satellite commander's cabin and lined up in 2 ranks. After that, there appeared to be a hitch. For 5 minutes they waited in silence. Then Camarello spoke to Trunho, who went back to the door to inquire. They waited another 5 minutes. Then the inner door of the room opened, and a voice said, in English, "My apologies for keeping you waiting, gentlemen." And into the cabin, dressed in an ordinary suit, stepped Jamie Gonvaya. He nodded to Troon. "Glad to see you, George. I trust you didn't have too uncomfortable a trip." "But how did you do it?" Troon wanted to know, later on, when they were alone together. "Less difficult than you might think," Jamie told him. "We put parties aboard the 2 mothballed satellites 6 months ago and prepared them for action which we hoped would not be necessary. We infiltrated undercover groups, both here and on the moon station. The rest was mostly a matter of suitable timing. I made a mistake over Jorge, though. Perhaps I did not tell him enough. If he had had a better idea of the scale, he'd very likely have played straight with us. However, its only effect was to delay the next phase of the operation. We did not want an alarm raised, for fear the Santa Maria should be diverted, and we need her intact. The radio operators were the key man in the takeover. A week ago, the one here, on Premiera, put over the internal speaker system a message announcing that the moon garrison had mutinied, imprisoned its officers, and called upon the Premiera crew to do the same. The moon operator put over a similar message, transposing the places. Both of them put their radios temporarily out of action, for safety, but continued to announce previously concocted messages over the internal system. During this stage, small shuttle-type rockets that we have been holding at the other satellites appeared close to Premiera, and one landed close to the moon station. Well, as you know, the Space Force was shot through with disaffection. Our undercover groups had worked on the men, and not found it very difficult. They were organised and ready, and were able to take over with very little trouble. Those who wouldn't join us have been transported to one of the mothball satellites, pro tem. The only thing that had gone wrong was at your end. The Santa Maria was on the way back here. If we made an announcement, she would be diverted, in which case we should lose not only your valuable selves, but a very valuable ship. So we made no announcement. We reopened radio communications with excuses about electrical interference and resumed routine messages as though nothing had happened. We have been bluffing for a week while we waited for you and the Santa Maria, and during that time, we've acquired a couple of shuttles of provisions as well. But in an hour or so now, the news will be broadcast. Camarello and our cousin Jorge have gone over to join the rest of the unpersuadables on the minor satellite, where they will remain until their government sends a ship to fetch them. The exact date and time for that will depend on how long it takes to sink into the official Rio minds that space is no longer a province of Brazil. Troon thought the position over silently for some moments. Then he said, "I had no idea you were brewing anything on such a scale as this, Jamie. Perhaps I should apologise to you for that, George, but it seemed wise to keep the compartments of the plan separate, as far as possible. And I think it was. It spared you the necessity of acting, and the need to watch yourself for slips. But now the operation is complete, and you're all set to spring it on them that space has become a state of Australia." "A state of Australia?" exclaimed Jamie. "Good God, man, do you think I want to start a war between Brazil and Australia? Certainly not. Space will declare itself an independent territory, if the use of the word territory is valid in the circumstances." Troon stared at him. "Independent? For heaven's sake, Jamie, space is, well, I mean, out here, in nothing, like this. I never… Why, It's utterly impossible, Jamie. Jamie Gonvaya smiled gently and shook his head. On the contrary, George, if you will consider the original raison d'etre of the satellites and the moon station, I think you will see that space, as an entity, is in an excellent position to propose terms. One day it may be in a position to do a useful trade, but until then, it can at least be the policeman of the world. And a policeman is worthy of his hire. George Troon continued to gaze reflectively at the floor for a full minute. When he looked up, his expression had lost its incredulity. He did not speak, but Jamie Gonvaya replied as if he had. Yes, George, he said. From today, your gnat voices are just a little closer.